She stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a letter from a dead uncle and a trunk full of broken dreams. Within minutes, bullets were flying, and a stranger threw himself in front of her, taking a shot meant for her heart. He vanished into the dust without a word, leaving only a trail of blood behind. But here's what Clara didn't know. That wounded cowboy hadn't spoken to another soul in 7 years. He came home from a cattle drive to find his wife and 2-year-old daughter already in the ground. The grief hollowed him out completely. So why would a man who wanted to disappear risk everything to save a woman he'd never met? And why did mysterious letters start appearing under her door every night, teaching her exactly how to survive in a town that wanted her gone? What happens when two shattered people find each other in the middle of nowhere and have to decide if love is worth the risk of losing everything again? This story reminds us that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the weight while still making room for something new. You don't have to choose between honoring your past and building your future. The meaning. Real strength isn't about avoiding heartbreak. It's about choosing to try again, even when you're terrified. Two broken people can build something stronger than either one could alone. If this message speaks to you, leave a comment sharing your story. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that matters. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Your support helps us keep creating content that heals. The stagecoach groaned to a halt in a cloud of red hollow dust. Clara Bennett peered out at what was supposed to be her new beginning. The town looked tired, with buildings leaning on each other for support. The main street was nothing but a rutted track of dried mud. Clara gathered her bags, which held everything she owned in the world, including the letter from an attorney named Thaddeus Blackwood. It said her Uncle George had passed on and left her his general store. She had only met her uncle twice in her 23 years. The driver opened the door and a cold October wind bit at her face. As she stepped down, the hem of her fine wool dress swept through the dirt, a clear sign she did not belong. The driver pointed. "McGinty's Hotel is that way. The general store is the other direction. You cannot miss it. It is the only one with its windows still in one piece." Clara stood alone as the stagecoach rattled away, realizing she was the only woman in sight. Men watched her from the shadows with an unnerving stillness. She lifted her chin and began walking toward the hotel, a decision she would instantly regret. She should have gone right to the lawyer's office. She should have sold the store without ever seeing it and gone back to her quiet life in Philadelphia. But there she was, dragging her trunk through a town full of hard-faced men. The bank stood on a corner, looking stout and important. Clara set her trunk down to rest her arms. Just as she caught her breath, the bank doors flew open. 3 men with bandanas over their faces burst out, their arms full of money sacks. The first man fired his pistol straight into the air. "Nobody move," he yelled. "The first one who follows us is a dead man." Time seemed to stretch and slow down. Clara saw the coldness in the gunman's eyes. She saw the bank clerk stumble out after them with blood running down his face. The whole street erupted into chaos, but Clara was frozen. Her feet felt like they were nailed to the spot. The second robber turned right toward her, raising his gun. "Get down," he shouted. But her legs would not listen. She was a perfect target. Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders and pulled her backward with incredible force. She fell against a man's solid chest as they both crashed against the wall of the bank. Gunfire exploded right where she had been standing. The man who saved her was a solid wall, covering her completely. One of his arms held her tight against him, while his other hand pushed her head down against his shoulder. "Do not move," he said. His voice was low and rough, but it was steady. Clara was trapped between the wall and this stranger, her face pressed into his shirt. She could feel his heart beating, slow and calm, as if this was just another day for him. More shots rang out and horse hooves thundered past. The stranger's grip tightened, and he shifted his body, making absolutely sure he was between her and the street. He was using himself as a human shield. She felt a small tug on his shirt near her hand and felt him flinch, just for a second. He made no sound. The gunfire finally faded, replaced by the shouts of men organizing a posse. Only then did the man ease his grip, letting Clara breathe. She looked up at him for the first time. He was tall and strong, with dark hair and a face that looked like it was carved from the tough country itself. But his eyes are what she would remember. They were a deep blue, like the sky just after the sun goes down. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her skin tingle. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Clara just shook her head, unable to find her voice. He let her go gently and took a step back. That is when she saw the dark red stain spreading across his blue shirt, just above his hip. The bullet had not missed. "You are shot," she gasped. "We need a doctor." "It is nothing," he said, bending to pick up his hat. He tried to hide the pain, but she could see it in his face. "Just grazed me, that is all." He put his hat back on, hiding his eyes in the shadow. "You should get off the street. It is not safe." "You saved my life," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I do not even know your name." He just looked at her for a long moment. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a silent goodbye and walked away, disappearing into the chaos. It is a terrible thing to travel 1,500 miles for a new beginning, only to be met with gunfire. Clara Bennett found herself in just that spot, saved from a bank robber's bullet by a stranger who simply vanished, leaving a trail of blood in the Texas dust. That man took a bullet meant for her, yet the town lawyer, Thaddeus Blackwood, advised her to let it go. He told her that in a frontier town like Red Hollow, some folks prefer to keep to themselves. This story is about a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. It reminds us that real strength isn't about avoiding hardship. It is about facing it head-on. If you have ever felt like you were counted out, you will want to hear what happened next. In his dusty office, Mr. Blackwood laid out the grim truth. The general store her Uncle George left her was failing badly. He was a kind man who gave too much credit and made poor business choices. For over 2 years, the store had not made a single dollar of profit. The lawyer suggested she sell the property right away. He had a buyer lined up, offering enough cash for her to go back to Philadelphia and live for a year or two. He warned her that staying meant fighting an uphill battle against debt, a bad reputation, and suppliers who would not trust her. It was the same story she had lived back east, a slow grind of barely getting by. But something was different this time. Clara thought of the man with the piercing blue eyes who risked his life for a complete stranger. People in Philadelphia did not do things like that. Right then, she made a choice. She told the lawyer she was staying. She would face the debts, the disrepair, and the doubters. She had come this far, and she was not about to turn tail and run. A flicker of respect showed on Mr. Blackwood's face as he handed her a sealed envelope. It was a final letter from her uncle, written just 3 days before he passed away. In her small hotel room that night, Clara read her uncle's shaky handwriting. He apologized for leaving her with such a mess. He admitted he should have been a bigger part of her life. He wrote, "The store is not much, but it is yours, free and clear, and that is more than most folks have in this world." He told her Red Hollow was hard country that either makes you or breaks you. His final words were a warning and a plea. "Clara, do not be like me. Do not wait until you are dying to start living. Take risks. Make mistakes. Let people in, especially when it scares you." Clara folded the letter, her heart heavy but her spirit determined. The tears would not come because she knew they would not change a thing. She stood at the window, looking out at the dark, dusty street of her new home. It was not much to look at. A dying store in a town that felt forgotten by the world. But it was hers. And for the first time in a long, long time, Clara Bennett felt like she had a real fight on her hands and maybe, just maybe, a reason to win. This forgotten town felt like the end of the world. Clara touched the cold window, her thoughts on the man who took a bullet for her out in the dark. He was a total stranger who asked for nothing and disappeared without a name. Her uncle once wrote, "Don't wait until you're dying to start living." Looking out at the sleeping town, she thought about the man with blue eyes. For the first time in 5 years, She felt alive. Sleep came in short bursts, every creak of the old hotel startling her awake. When morning finally came, she put on her plainest dark blue dress, a piece of armor from her old life. The woman in the mirror looked ordinary, with tired gray eyes and hair pulled back tight. Downstairs in the dining room, Mrs. McGinty, a tough woman with iron gray hair, served her a plate of greasy eggs and biscuits as hard as rocks. All the men just stared. Mrs. McGinty refilled her coffee. "You must be the Bennett girl heard about the trouble yesterday." She also heard Caleb Rowan got himself shot pulling some fool girl from the east out of the way. Clara froze. "That was you, wasn't it?" Mrs. McGinty said, her eyes sharp. "Is he all right?" Clara asked. "He will live. Takes more than that to kill Caleb." "Are you planning on thanking him?" "I would if I knew where to find him. He has a place a 2-hour ride north, out past Eagle Ridge. But he is a man who does not want company." Mrs. McGinty gave her some advice. "The best way to thank him is to let it be. He did what needed doing, that is all." Clara went to see the store. It was worse than she imagined. The sign was peeling and the front window was thick with grime. Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer, handed her 3 keys and pushed the stuck door open. Inside, a thick blanket of dust covered everything. Shelves were broken or empty. The air smelled like mice and failure. Her inheritance was a ruin. "Your uncle's living quarters are upstairs," Blackwood said softly. "The inventory in the ledger book probably does not match what is on the shelves," he warned. In the back, she found broken crates and scattered goods. Blackwood then told her, "It is not too late to reconsider. A buyer is offering $300. You could take the money and start over." $300 was a ticket back to her old gray life. But she thought of her uncle's words and Caleb Rowan's courage. "No," Clara said, her voice steady. "The store is mine. I'm going to make it work." Mr. Blackwood sighed. "I wish you luck, Miss Bennett. You're going to need it." After he left, Clara stood alone in the dusty ruin. The job was impossible, but it was hers. She rolled up her sleeves and began to clean. By noon, she had cleared one entire shelf. As she dragged a broken crate outside, a woman with a kind, weathered face appeared at the door. "I am Sarah Pritchard," she said with a small smile. "I run the boarding house down the street. I heard you had arrived. George would be glad the store has life in it again. It has been empty since he passed." "Did you know my uncle?" "I knew him well enough. He was a good, soft-hearted man." Sarah looked Clara right in the eye. "I heard about what happened yesterday, and that Caleb Rowan saved your life." Clara's grip on the wooden crate tightened. "News sure travels fast in this town. It is a small place. When something happens, the whole town knows before supper." Sarah's smile was faint. "I also heard you were asking after him. I just want to thank him. That is what I need to talk to you about. Clara, Caleb Rowan is not a man you should get tangled up with. He saved my life. I am sure he had his reasons, but it was not to start something with you. Caleb has been through more than most." Sarah chose her next words with care. "He lost his wife and baby girl to cholera 7 years ago. He was away on a cattle drive and came home to find them already in the ground." Clara gasped. "That is awful." It broke something inside him. He sold off his herd and just shut himself away from the world. He hardly ever comes to town. He does not talk to anyone if he can help it. He is just out there, all alone. And that means you should respect his wishes and leave him be. But everyone keeps telling me that. He took a bullet for me, Mrs. Pritchard. How can I just ignore it? You can respect his choice to be left alone." Sarah's voice was kind but firm. "Out here, we let a man grieve in his own way, especially after what Caleb has been through." Clara wanted to argue that a simple thank you was not an intrusion, but something in Sarah's eyes, a quiet plea, stopped her. "I understand," Clara said, though she was not sure she did. Sarah's face relaxed. "Good. Now, I came to invite you to dinner tonight at my boarding house. You should not be alone your first week here." The kindness of the offer made Clara's throat feel tight. "Thank you. I would like that very much. Be there at 6 o'clock. And do not worry about dressing up." After Sarah was gone, Clara stood in the quiet, dusty store. She thought about a man so broken he had hidden from the world for 7 years. She understood loss. Her parents died from a fever when she was only 9. But she could not imagine Caleb's pain, and she could not stop thinking about his blue eyes, which held a sadness deeper than any she had ever seen. She wondered if his wound was healing and if anyone was out there taking care of him. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe the kindest thing she could do was leave him in his solitude. Still, that did not stop her from wanting to see those blue eyes just one more time. She needed to understand what they were trying to tell her in that moment of chaos. Clara spent the whole afternoon sweeping and scrubbing the old store. By the time she had to leave for dinner, she'd cleared a few aisles and found a family of mice. She washed up with cold water from the pump out back and put on her best dress. The boarding house was one of the nicer buildings in Red Hollow. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Sarah welcomed her with a big smile. "You are right on time. Come on in." The dining room table was full of women who all turned to look at Clara. Sarah introduced them. There was the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Thornton, and her daughter Emma. Mrs. Chen from the laundry was there, and Miss Alice Murphy, the school teacher. Sit down, Sarah said, pulling out a chair. The meal was wonderful. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. The women asked Clara all sorts of questions. They wanted to know where she was from and if she was really in the bank robbery. "I heard Caleb Rowan saved you," a young woman named Emma said, her eyes wide. "Emma," her mother scolded, "do not be nosy." "It is all right," Clara said. "Yes, he stepped in front of me when the shooting started. I did not even see him. He was just there." She remembered the feeling of his arms around her, protecting her without a second thought. "That sounds just like Caleb," said Alice Murphy, the school teacher. "He does not say much, but he acts when it counts. Did you know him well? I was new here when his wife Mary passed away. She was a lovely person, and their little girl Rebecca was just 2 years old. The sweetest child you ever saw." The table grew quiet. You could feel how fresh the 7-year-old tragedy still was. When Caleb came back from that cattle drive, Mrs. Thornton said, and found them both gone. "I have never seen a man so broken. He just stood at their graves for weeks. We all thought we were going to lose him, too." "He lives," Sarah said with a sad look, "but I am not sure he is truly alive. Not like he was before." Clara thought about that. She thought about the difference between surviving and living, and she thought about a man who had lost everything but still had the strength to save a stranger. After dinner, Sarah walked Clara back to the general store. The night sky was full of stars. "Thank you for the meal," Clara said, "and for the company. You are welcome any time." Sarah paused. "I meant what I said about Caleb. I know it sounds harsh." "I understand," Clara said softly. "I will not bother him." Sarah looked relieved. "Good. That man does not need any more pain." Clara climbed the stairs to her new home. It was just 2 small rooms filled with dust and the memory of her uncle. She sat down and read his letter again. It said, "Do not wait until you are dying to start living." She had decided to stay, to make a life here. That was living, right? But as she lay in the dark, she could not stop thinking about the man who was surviving but not living, the man who saved her life and wanted nothing in return. She could not get his haunted blue eyes out of her mind, and she had a strong feeling that their story was not over. The moment he pulled her out of harm's way felt like a beginning, not an ending. She fell asleep dreaming of him. Clara figured she'd been left with nothing but bad luck and her uncle's debts. But when she was about to quit, help arrived from the last person she ever expected. It started with a letter slipped under her door one night. The handwriting was a man's, strong and sure. It wasn't a love letter. It was a blueprint for survival. The note told her exactly where the leak in the roof was and how to stop the mice getting in by the stove. It even told her where to find her uncle's business contacts. There was no signature. But Clara's heart hammered in her chest because she knew. Caleb Rowan wasn't done with her after all. The advice was plain and simple, just like the man she remembered. No fancy words, just what she needed to do to keep from going under. So that morning, Clara dragged tar paper up a ladder and found the hole right where the letter said it would be. She patched it up, her hands clumsy and cold. By the time she got down, customers were already waiting. As she fumbled with prices and made change, a woman named Mrs. Foster looked around the store with a sour face. She mentioned her children loved the peppermint sticks George used to sell. Clara promised to order some, and the woman's expression softened just a bit. Later, Clara found the lockbox, just like the letter said. It was full of her uncle's business papers. She saw just how deep in debt he'd been. That night, another letter came. It warned her not to use her uncle's old supplier for the peppermint sticks, saying the man was a cheat. It told her to use a fella in Helena instead. But the letter also said she'd need cash up front because of her uncle's bad credit. The problem was she didn't have any cash to spare. She looked at her uncle's old things, wondering what to sell. The only valuable item she owned was her mother's brooch, and she'd sooner starve. Then she remembered the store's ledger, which listed everyone who owed her uncle money. She was shocked at the amounts. Tom Brewster owed $43. The Halverson family owed $67. All told, people owed the store a small fortune. Her uncle hadn't just been kind. He'd been a poor businessman. Clara knew what she had to do. She walked straight over to Tom Brewster's farm. He was a skinny man who wouldn't look her in the eye. When she told him she needed the $43 he owed, he finally looked at her. He said George never asked him for the money. Clara kept her voice firm and said George was gone and she couldn't run a store on empty promises. Brewster told her his crops had failed and he could barely feed his family. Clara took one look at his worn-out farm and knew he was telling the truth. She told him to keep the money, but that from now on he'd have to pay cash for his supplies. She got the same story at every other house. Everyone was struggling. By sundown, she hadn't collected a single dollar. That night's letter was waiting for her. It said she did the right thing, that fighting for money that wasn't there was a fool's errand. But it also said she still needed cash. The letter told her to sell her uncle's silver pocket watch to a buyer in Helena. It was worth about $60, and her uncle would have wanted her to survive. Clara found the beautiful watch right where the note said it would be. After setting it aside, she wrote a letter of her own and left it on the counter. She thanked him for his help, but asked why he wouldn't show his face. His answer was there the next morning. He wrote that he didn't want anything in return. He was helping because she needed it, and that was reason enough. He told her to accept the help, but not to ask him to be someone he couldn't be. The words stung, but Clara started to understand. A man like Caleb, who'd lost so much, would be scared to get close to anyone again. So he helped her from the shadows, offering a hand without risking his heart. It wasn't what she wanted, but she knew it was all he could give. From then on, the letters became her daily routine. They were her lifeline, guiding her on which suppliers to trust and how to make the store a success. Slowly but surely, with the help of her silent guardian, Clara started to build a new life. She got the hang of the folks in Red Hollow, figuring out who was good for their word and who was not. The town's women warmed up to her, with folks like Alice Murphy helping with the ledgers. One evening, Alice told her, "You have more backbone for this than George ever did." Claire confessed she had been getting secret advice. Alice smiled, already knowing. "That would be Caleb," she said, explaining how he used to help George. "Have you seen him?" Alice asked, her tone shifting to a warning. She told Clara that Caleb did not take kindly to visitors. "He will just break your heart, Clara. Do not go out there." Alice's voice was gentle, full of a sad certainty. "That man died right alongside Mary and Rebecca. All that's left now is just a shadow walking around." But Clara thought of his letters, the steady care in each and every line. "I am not so sure that is true," she said softly. Alice just shook her head. "Child, don't mistake a helping hand for an open heart. It is just easier for him to fix things from a safe distance." Clara knew better than to argue. That night, she simply left a note on the counter. Your advice was good. The store is making a little money. You saved me from going under, and I do not know how to thank you. I hope you're healing up well. With gratitude, Clara. She had to fight the powerful urge to write more, knowing it might scare him off for good. The next morning, a longer letter than usual was waiting for her. The wound is nothing to worry about. You are building something real here. George was too soft-hearted. But you have got his kindness and a spine of steel. This store is going to make it because you will not let it fail. Winter is coming on, so you should stock up on extra lamp oil and coffee, and get Tom Brewster to sweep your chimney. Then came the one line that made her heart stop. That patch on the roof will not hold. I will fix it proper. He was coming here. To her. He came in the dead of night. Clara woke up to the sound of heavy boots on the roof above her. She pulled on a shawl and crept quietly downstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. A dark shape moved against the starry sky, working with a quiet and steady purpose. When the work finally stopped, she heard him climbing down a ladder out back. Acting on pure instinct, she opened the back door just as his boots touched the ground. Caleb froze solid, his face hidden by his hat, looking like a wild animal that was ready to bolt. Thank you, she whispered, for the roof and for everything else. The quiet stretched out between them, thin and fragile. I am not trying to trap you, she added. I just wanted to finally say thank you to your face. He finally spoke, his voice rougher and deeper than she remembered. The roof will hold through the winter. How can I ever repay you? She asked. The store, the letters, all of it. You do not need to. Just make this store work. That is enough. Is it? The words slipped right out. Is advice from the shadows all you have to give? He flinched, and she saw his jaw tighten up. It is all I have got. I do not believe that. Then you do not know me, he said, his voice suddenly hard as iron. I am not some hero from a storybook waiting for a pretty woman to save him. Helping you just gives me something to focus on besides my own troubles. Do not make it more than that. The words should have stung, but all she heard was a desperate man trying to protect what was left of his heart. I am not trying to save you, she said quietly. I am just trying to know you. You cannot. He turned to leave. The letters will keep coming. But this, us talking, it has to stop now. Leave your questions on the counter. Do not wait up for me again. He disappeared into the darkness, and she heard his horse ride off into the night. But Clara knew for certain that Alice was wrong. He was not empty. He was a man drowning in his pain, and she understood that better than anybody. The next letter she found was slid under her front door. I was too harsh last night. You did not deserve that. But you need to understand something. 7 years ago, I lost my wife and my daughter. I came home from a long cattle drive to 2 fresh graves. The people in this town see a broken man, and maybe they are right. But this broken feeling is all I have left of them. If I heal, if I let somebody else get close, it feels like I am betraying their memory. It feels like saying that they did not matter. So please, take the help that I can give, but do not ask for the man that I used to be. Do not make this any harder than it already is. Caleb. It was the first time he had ever signed his full name. It was the first time he had shown her the real man behind all the letters. And Clara understood. Healing was not about forgetting. It was about learning how to carry the weight. In her letter back, Clara shared her own story of loss. Caleb, she wrote, I lost my folks to a fever when I was just 9. I have been strong and alone ever since. But just surviving is not the same as living. She told him that helping her would not betray his lost family. It would honor them. Maybe it is time to let someone save you back, she finished, leaving the note on the counter. The day passed with no answer, and her heart sank. But the next morning, a hammering sound woke her. Downstairs, she found Caleb, already hard at work fixing the warped front door. Clara watched him from the stairs, not daring to speak. Finally, Caleb stopped his work. The door was swelling, he said, not quite looking at her. Come winter, you would be stuck. She thanked him, and he said he would be there most of the day. It was not a grand speech, but it was him, right there in the daylight. Clara made coffee, and their fingers brushed when she handed him the cup. The whole town buzzed with gossip seeing him there, but Caleb paid them no mind. When the door was fixed, he promised to return for the shutters. I am choosing to, he said, finally meeting her gaze. Something had truly changed. Caleb started coming by every few days, always early, to fix something around the store. He repaired the shutters, the shelves, and even built a new counter. At first, they worked in a comfortable quiet, but little by little they started talking. He told her that her uncle was a good man, though a poor businessman who had helped him after his wife Mary passed. Caleb said he was maybe just repaying an old debt. As the weather turned cold, he taught her the ways of the frontier, and she found herself listening just to hear the sound of his voice. Our profit margins are looking better, and it is all thanks to you. No, he said, shaking his head. You are the one making this place run. I just gave you a little nudge. Clara knew it was more than that. She set down her list and said, Caleb, I would have lost everything without you. You saved me. He looked away, uncomfortable with any praise. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. The day I saw you in the street, about to get hurt, something inside me just moved. It was the first real thing I had felt in 7 years. I could not just walk away and let you fail. So, you wrote me those letters. He nodded. Seemed safer than letting you see a broken man like me. But the letters were not enough, were they? Clara asked softly. No, she admitted. I wanted to meet the real you. She gently placed her hand over his. And I think I still do. Just then, the bell on the door chimed, and Caleb pulled back into a safe distance. But that night, his letter felt different. It read, Clara, I do not know if this is healing or just a new kind of hurt. But when I am with you, I feel something besides the pain, and I am scared of it. I am scared of what happens if I let myself care and lose you too. But I am even more scared of what happens if I do not even try. Clara held the letter to her heart. He was offering her his trust, cracked and bruised as it was. The next morning, she knew she was tired of them circling each other like nervous horses. When Caleb came to work, she brought him his coffee but did not leave. She decided it was time to stop being so careful. I got your letter, she said. He kept his eyes on his work. Figured you would. You said you are afraid, Clara continued, her own heart thumping in her chest. Well, I am afraid too. I came here just to survive, but then you saved my life, and now I am just plain terrified because I do not know how to let someone in. He finally turned to face her. Do what? She whispered. Let someone get close. You are not the only broken one around here, you know. He took a step toward her. Clara, I do not know if I can be what you need. My hands are not even steady most days. She looked down at them. They are not shaking now. I think you are stronger than you give yourself credit for. You survived the worst thing a man can, and you are still here, still kind. That is not broken, Caleb. When Mary and Rebecca died, he confessed, his voice thick with old pain. I wanted to die with them. The only thing that stopped me was knowing Mary would have called me a coward. I am glad you did not, Clara said. He ran a hand through his hair. That is what you would be getting, Clara. A man who is not even sure he wants to be alive. I am not asking for a whole man, she said, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I'm just asking you to try. With me. One day at a time. Slowly, he reached out and touched her cheek, so gently she barely felt it. I will likely disappoint you. Probably, she agreed, leaning into his hand. I will probably disappoint you too. I do not remember how to do this. Then we can figure it out together. The bell on the front door rang, breaking the spell. You should go, he said, his hand dropping away. Clara wanted to pull him back, to argue, but she knew better. In the short time she had known Caleb, she had learned you could not push a man like that. One wrong move and he would bolt. So she just nodded and went to serve Mrs. Thornton and her daughter, Emma. The older woman's eyes lit up. "Was that Caleb Rowan I heard back there?" Clara kept her voice even. "He is just fixing some shelves for me." Emma leaned over the counter, trying to get a look. "Mama says he was handsome before his wife passed." "Emma, that is just plain rude," her mother scolded. "Well, everyone says he used to laugh," the girl continued. "And now he is just—" "He is still a man who deserves respect," Clara cut in, her tone sharper than she intended. After they left, the sound of Caleb packing his tools echoed from the back. "You are leaving?" Clara asked, her heart sinking. "I need to check on the ranch," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I will be back tomorrow to finish. Caleb, please do not do this. Do." He finally looked at her, his face a mask of misery. "Do not make this more than what it is, Clara. I'm just helping you out." The words stung, but she held her ground. "You and I both know that is not all this is." "Well, maybe it should be," he said, grabbing his tool bag. "Maybe this was a mistake." He was out the back door before she could find the words to stop him. The back door slammed shut, and the sound echoed the ache in Clara's chest. Loving Caleb Rowan, she was beginning to understand, was a difficult dance. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. He was fighting his own ghosts, and she did not know how to help. But she had fought her own fears to come here. 500 miles to a town most people had given up on. She could be patient. She could give him space. At least she hoped he would come back. But one day turned into 4, and the silence from his ranch was deafening. Clara started to panic. Had she finally scared him off for good? She poured all her energy into the store, which was now doing better than ever. She had paid off her uncle's debts, and folks were starting to come back. The town was slowly feeling like home, but it was a hollow victory without Caleb to share it with. On the 5th morning, a scraping sound at her door woke her before sunrise. It was not a letter. It was a heavy, wrapped package. Inside, she found an old leather book titled Practical Business Management for Western Merchants. Tucked inside was a note. It was from Caleb. "This was Mary's," the note began. "She was always better with numbers than I was. I've been carrying this book around for 7 years, unable to even look at it. It reminded me too much of her. But I finally read some of her notes in the margins last night. Mary would not want this book gathering dust. She would want it to be used. She would want it to help you. I run from good things, Clara. It is what I do because I'm terrified of losing them. But running from you felt worse than staying. I'm trying. The shelves still need finishing. I will be there this afternoon if you will have me." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she hugged the book to her chest. This was more than a gift. This was Caleb trusting her. He was opening a door he had kept locked for 7 long years, sharing his late wife's thoughts, her handwriting, her memory. He was showing her that moving forward did not mean he had to forget. She spent the morning with the book, feeling a strange connection to Mary through her clever notes and little jokes in the margins. Clara finally understood what it cost him to give her this, and what he was truly trying to say. When Caleb showed up that afternoon, Clara was ready. She had fresh coffee waiting and a note of her own. He read it right there in the doorway. In it, she thanked him for trusting her with something so precious. She told him she understood the need to run, but that she was not going anywhere. She was not trying to replace Mary, but she hoped there was room in his life for both the past and the future. Caleb carefully folded the note and put it in the pocket over his heart. Then he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. He held on tight, his face buried in her hair, as if she were the only thing keeping him standing. Clara held him right back, feeling him tremble as 7 years of loneliness and grief finally broke free. "I am terrified," he whispered. "I know," she said. "If I lose you—" "You will not," she promised. "You cannot promise that." No, she admitted, but I can promise I will not leave by choice. I will fight for us. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cupping her face. Why? Why fight for a broken man like me? Because you are worth fighting for, Clara said, covering his hands with her own. And because I'm tired of playing it safe. You make me feel alive, Caleb. This time he kissed her. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of fear and hope. She kissed him back, pouring all the words she could not say into that one moment. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I do not know how to do this, he breathed. Neither do I, she said. We will just have to figure it out together. He let out a rusty sound that might have been a laugh. Together. Now that is a terrifying word. The best things usually are, she smiled. Just then, the bell on the front door jingled. A customer. I should go, Caleb said, but he did not move. I will finish the shelves. Stay as long as you need me. The words were simple, but they held the one promise she needed to hear. He was not running, not today. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. He would fix things around the store, and she would be right there, their hands brushing, their shoulders touching. He started to talk more, and slowly, quietly, they began to build something new. Model. He started talking more, not about his family, that was still too fresh a wound, but about his life before. He told her about the ranch and the long cattle drives. Clara told him about her quiet years as a seamstress in Philadelphia. You are good with your hands, Caleb noted one day, watching her mend a feed sack. I made dresses for rich women who looked right through me, she explained. I hated being invisible. You are not invisible now, he said, his gaze steady and intense. Everyone in Red Hollow talks about the Eastern girl who turned this store around. They talk about you, too, she said. About how Caleb Rowan finally came down from his mountain. Used to be, all that talk would have sent me running, he admitted. But then he looked right at her. Now I reckon staying with you is worth all the gossip. That night's letter was not pushed under her door. This time he was waiting to give it to her himself. Clara, that letter of yours hit me right where I live. For 7 long years I figured my heart was all boarded up, that loving someone new would mean forgetting Mary and Rebecca, like there was only so much room inside. But you got me thinking maybe a heart just gets bigger. Now, I'm not saying I am all healed up. Some mornings the grief is so heavy it is a chore just to breathe. But I am saying I want to try with you. I want to find out if I can be more than just a man haunted by ghosts. You scare me, Clara Bennett, because caring for you feels like tempting fate. But not caring scares me a whole lot more. So here I am, scared down to my boots, but willing to see what is next if you are. Yours, Caleb. She wrote back before her tears could dry, her own hand shaking. Caleb, yes, I am scared too, but I would rather be scared with you than safe by myself. You are not alone in this anymore. I am here to stay. Yours too, Clara. The next morning, Caleb showed up with coffee, a small gesture that felt like a seismic shift. Standing there in her little storage room, he finally spoke. That sign of yours out front is looking mighty tired. I could build you a new one at the ranch. He was talking about the future, about coming back, about staying. And Clara's heart settled. I would like that, she said, her voice soft. Then he pulled a small cloth-wrapped object from his pocket. This was for Christmas, but I cannot wait. Inside was an old iron key, worn smooth from use. It is to the house, he mumbled, his voice thick. In case you ever need a place to go. Or if I go quiet for a few days, you can come check on me. Make sure I am still kicking. It was more than a key. It was trust. It was him giving her a piece of his solitude. Thank you, she whispered, her hand closing around it. I will take care of you. I do not need, he started. Yes, she cut in gently. You do. Clara sat with his coffee, taking his hand in hers. Everybody needs somebody, Caleb. He stared at their joined hands, a storm of emotions on his face. This still feels like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe this time, she said, squeezing his hand. It will not. He pulled her into a hug then, and she felt the last of his walls begin to crumble. A few days later, a silence fell where his morning visits used to be, a deep quiet that Clara knew in her bones meant trouble. He was drowning in one of those bad days he had warned her about. So she closed up shop, borrowed a horse, and rode north toward the ridge. The wind bit sharp, but the thought of him facing those demons alone pushed her onward. The ranch was a lonely spot, just a log house and a barn against the big sky. Smoke curled from the chimney, but the place was still as a grave. Gathering her nerve, Clara unlocked the door with his key and stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by a low fire. And there he was, at a table with his back to her, a whiskey bottle and a worn piece of paper his only company. He did not turn. "You should not be here," he said, his voice raw and broken. "This is one of those bad days. You need to go." "I am not going anywhere," she answered, moving around the table to face him. His eyes were wrecked. She could see the letter he was clutching was so old it was nearly see-through. "I woke up," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "and I could not remember Rebecca's laugh. It is just gone." Clara's heart ached for him. She sat down and gently took his hand. "Tell me about her," she urged. "Help me remember." He hesitated. Then the story started to spill out, halting and full of pain. "She was 2, he said, his voice cracking. "She called me Papa. And her laugh. It was like little bells." His grip tightened on her hand. "When the fever took her and Mary, I was 300 miles away on a cattle drive. The letters said it was just a cold. By the time I got them, they were already gone. I did not even know they were sick." He finally looked up at her, the anguish in his eyes a bottomless well. "How is that not my fault?" "It was my fault," Caleb stated, his voice hollow. "That cattle drive. I chose the money. If I'd been home, maybe the doctor would have gotten here sooner. Maybe I could have saved them. Or you would have died right alongside them," Clara said firmly. "Sickness does not care what you want, it just takes. You being here would not have changed a thing. You can't know that for sure." "Neither can you," she replied softly. "But I do know that punishing yourself for 7 years is not bringing them back. It is just stealing the rest of your life." He laughed, a sound with no joy. "Mary would not want you to suffer, everyone says that. But Mary is not here. She does not get a vote." "No, she does not," Clara said, taking his hand. "But you do. You get to choose, Caleb. You can keep drowning in what was, or you can start living again. It is not a betrayal to remember them with love while you build a new life." "I am scared," he whispered, "that if I let go of the pain, I will lose them. The pain is all I have left. That letter I was reading," he said, his back still to her. "Mary wrote it 3 weeks before she passed. She thought she was pregnant again. She wrote about our future, about watching our kids grow up on this ranch. She was so happy, Clara. She died believing all those dreams were coming true." "She died loved, Caleb," Clara said gently. "She knew her husband adored her and her daughter was safe. In her final moments, she had the love you built. That is not nothing." He turned and tears finally broke free, tracing paths down his dusty cheeks. "I just do not know how to let go." "Then do not," Clara said, closing the distance and wrapping her arms around him. "Do not let go. Just make room. Room for the grief, the love, the memories. And for me." He finally broke, 7 years of pain pouring out in deep, ragged sobs. When the storm calmed, he pulled back. "I am sorry. You should not see me like this." "Where else would I be?" Clara asked, cupping his face. "This is what it means to be together. The good days and the bad. Today is a bad day. I am still here." "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you want me?" "You want Because, under all this sadness, you are a good and kind man, Clara answered. You are the man who helps strangers and builds shelves for a woman he hardly knows. Because when you look at me, I feel truly seen for the first time in my life. You are worth fighting for, Caleb Rowan, even if you do not believe it. He kissed her then, a kiss filled with gratitude and desperation. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her strength into it. Stay, he pleaded when they parted. Just for today. Please do not leave me alone. I will stay, she whispered. He showed her the ranch, the quiet barn, and the small weed-choked garden Mary once tended. They stood before two simple wooden crosses on a hill. Mary Rowan, beloved wife and mother. Rebecca Rowan, our little angel. I come up here every morning, Caleb said. I tell them about my day. I tell them about you. You told them about me? I had to. You are the biggest thing that has happened to me in 7 years. I told Mary you are stubborn and make awful coffee. I told Rebecca she would have liked your kind eyes. I hope they are glad I am not alone anymore. I think they are, Clara said, taking his hand. I think they want you to be happy. I am not sure I know how to be. Then we will figure it out together. That evening, over a simple meal of beans and bacon, the quiet of the house felt heavy. This place is so silent, Clara said. How do you bear it? I got used to it, he admitted. It is better with you here. You could stay in town sometimes, she suggested. Above the store? Are you asking me to move in? I am asking you to stop being alone all the time, she clarified. People are already talking, Caleb countered. Then let us give them something real to talk about, she said, taking his hand. I am not trying to rush you, but I want more than just stolen moments while you fix things at the store. I want you in my life. I do not know if I can live in town, he said. Too many people, too many memories. Then I will come out here. We will make it work, Caleb. But I need you to meet me halfway. I cannot be the only one reaching. He stood and pulled her into his arms. You are right. I am sorry. I have been so lost in my own grief, I have not even thought about what you need. I want you, Clara said simply, all of you. But I need a partner, not a project. Then a partner is what I will be, he vowed, kissing her softly. Starting right now, you came all this way for me. You held me while I fell to pieces. You stood at my wife's grave and did not run. That is more than just trying, Clara. That is love. Is it? She breathed. Yeah, he whispered. It is. And it scares me to death, but I am so grateful for it. Grateful for you. That night she slept in his bed while he took a blanket on the floor. It was an unspoken understanding. As Clara drifted to sleep, she heard the steady sound of his breathing in the dark, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt completely safe. The next morning, they rode back to town together, the rising sun at their backs. Caleb's visits became a regular thing in town. He would finish his work and even start taking meals with Clara upstairs. The town watched, and the whispers turned into friendly greetings. Alice Murphy pulled Clara aside one afternoon. He is more alive than I have seen him in years, she said. Alice then mentioned the upcoming harvest social. You should both come, she urged. It would mean a lot to see you there, participating in life again. That night, over stew, Clara brought up the social, knowing it was a big step for a man who had shut himself away for so long. Caleb mulled over the words, a town social. That meant music, dancing, and every single person watching them. He knew they didn't have to go, but Clara deserved a partner who wouldn't hide. He told her, You're right. I've been holed up for 7 long years. It's time I stood by you out in the open. His smile didn't quite reach his haunted eyes, but it was a start. He admitted he was not sure, but he was willing to try for her. That chilly December evening, music spilled from the town hall. Clara, in her best green dress, felt a bundle of nerves. When Caleb met her, he looked like a man walking to the gallows, but he offered his arm and said, Let's go. The moment they stepped inside, the chatter died down and every eye in Red Hollow turned their way. Clara felt Caleb stiffen beside her, ready to bolt. She just squeezed his hand as a reminder to breathe. He straightened up, settling in for the long haul. They sat for a spell, quietly enduring the stares, until folks started talking again. When the fiddle struck up a waltz, Clara watched the dancers, a little sadness in her heart. Suddenly, Caleb stood and offered her his hand. "Dance with me," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I ain't any good, but I want to try with you." Clara's heart soared as he led her onto the floor. He was clumsy, his steps stiff and unsure, but he was trying, and that was everything. She whispered that she could not believe he was doing this. He looked her square in the eye and missed a step. "I love you, Clara Bennett," he said, plain as day. "I love how you see me as a whole man, not a broken one." Tears welled in her eyes as she told him, "I love you too. Your sad smiles, your kind hands, and the way you still care, even when it hurts." They swayed together, the only two people in the world. When the song ended, he leaned his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he breathed, "for not giving up on me." Walking home, his hand warm in hers, they both knew the shadows were finally behind them. Have you ever felt guilty for being happy? That's the kind of heartbreak that can sneak up and steal your future. But sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you to see that a heart's got room for both memory and new love. If you've ever wondered if you can move on without letting go, this story is for you. 3 days after the town social, a fierce winter storm rolled into Red Hollow, covering everything in a thick white blanket. The cold seeped right into the bones of Clara's store. Caleb's letter was on the counter, a welcome sight. She smiled, reading his familiar handwriting. He said the roads were getting bad, but he was coming anyway to finish her shelves. He wrote that a day without seeing her just felt wrong. He was even bringing a load of firewood, saying her stack wouldn't last. A few months ago, she was all alone. Now, she had a home, and a good man riding through a snowstorm just for her. When Caleb arrived, covered in snow, he went right to work stacking firewood by the back door. Clara poured him a cup of coffee, her heart full. "You didn't have to come out in this weather," she said, handing him the admittedly awful coffee. "Sure I did," Caleb answered, warming his hands on the mug. "If I'd waited, it might have been a week before I could get back. And I wouldn't have liked that one bit." He looked at her over the cup, his blue eyes leaving no room for doubt. "Yeah," she admitted softly. "Me neither." They fell into their usual comfortable rhythm. But Clara could tell something was weighing on him. He was quiet, his mind somewhere else. She finally cornered him in the storage room. "All right, what's wrong?" she asked gently. He put his hammer down. "It's December 9th. The date meant nothing to her." "It's Rebecca's birthday," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "She would have been 9 years old." He confessed that his first thought that morning had been of her, not his daughter. "And I felt guilty," he choked out. "Like I was betraying her memory by feeling happy with you." Clara's heart ached for him. She took his hands in hers. "Oh, Caleb, you're not betraying her by finding happiness. She would want that for you." "How can you know that?" he asked, his grip tightening. "She was just a little girl. I'm forgetting the sound of her laugh, Clara. And now that I have you, it feels like I'm leaving her behind." "No," Clara said, pulling him into a hug. "Your heart just made room for me. It doesn't mean there's less room for her. Grief plays tricks on us. It tells us moving forward is the same as forgetting." She pulled back to look him in the eye. "Tell me about her birthday. What would you all have done?" He pictured it. Mary would have baked a chocolate cake. We'd give her something horse-related, and we'd talk about how fast she was growing up. "Then let's honor that," Clara insisted. "Let's close up the store and go remember her. Not grieve her, but celebrate the little girl she was." Caleb looked unsure, but after a moment he slowly nodded. They closed the store and walked through the fresh snow to the little cemetery on the hill. Caleb knelt by the small grave, tenderly brushing the snow off the wooden cross. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. "Happy birthday. You'd be 9 today." His voice cracked. "I brought someone to meet you. Her name is Clara. She's real special, Rebecca. I think you would have liked her." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened. "I'm trying to be happy again," he told his daughter. "It feels wrong sometimes. But Clara says my heart has room for the grief and the love, for the memories and the future. And I'm choosing to believe her." He stood up and reached for Clara's hand. She stepped beside him. "Rebecca," Clara said softly, "your daddy talks about you all the time. I promise I'll take good care of him. I'll love him, and I'll never try to take your mama's place." Caleb squeezed her hand, his own tears finally falling. But looking at him, Clara saw they weren't just tears of sorrow, but of hope. Model, a deep sadness. But there was something else mixed in there, too. A quiet kind of peace. They walked back to town without a word, the silence comfortable between them. At the store, Caleb didn't head to the back. He led Clara upstairs and just held her tight like she was the only thing keeping his boots on the ground. He whispered, "Thank you." Clara knew he meant for not making him choose. "You don't have to," she whispered back. That night, something changed for good. They lay on her small bed, still dressed, and talked until the sun threatened to rise. He told her about growing up in Kentucky, about a hard father and a mother gone too soon. He spoke of his sweet Mary, and the day his girl Rebecca was born, making his heart feel too big for his chest. Clara told him about being an orphan, about folks who took her in but never truly wanted her. She talked about a loneliness so constant she'd nearly forgot it was there, and a letter about a dusty old store that felt like her only way out. "I'm sure glad you came," Caleb said, his voice low in the dark. "Glad you were too stubborn to let me run you off." "I'm glad you saved my hide twice," she said, nestling closer. "I came here expecting nothing and found everything." He chuckled softly. "That's a heavy load for an old cowboy." "You ain't old," she smiled against his shirt. "You're just well worn, like good leather." When she woke, he was still there, just watching her. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," he said back. "Folks'll be talking if my horse is still here." "Let 'em talk," she said, propping herself up. "Caleb Rowan. Everyone in this town with eyes knows we're together. The only ones still pretending are us." A true, wide smile spread across his face. "You're right. As always." "Then stay," she said. "Have breakfast with me. Let Red Hollow see you're staying." "Yeah," he said, the words solid. "I'm staying." In the weeks that followed, Caleb became a fixture in her life, splitting his time between the ranch and the store. He was working in town, and she was in his heart. The town stopped whispering and just accepted it. But that kind of peace never lasts. One afternoon, 3 hard-faced men rode up to the store, each wearing a gun like it was part of him. The one in charge, a man with a nasty scar through his eyebrow, got down from his horse. "This Bennett's place?" he growled. "It is," Clara answered, gripping her broom tighter. "Name's Jack Carver. We're looking for ranch work. Heard your man, Caleb Rowan, might know who's hiring." The way he said it made Clara's skin crawl. "I can ask him," she said, keeping her voice even. "You do that," Carver said with a smirk that wasn't a smile. "Tell him we remember him from the old days. Tell him Jack Carver is back in Montana." When they left, Clara felt a chill cut right through her. She found Caleb in the back and told him. All the color drained from Caleb's face. "Jack Carver is here? In Red Hollow? You know him?" "I know him," Caleb said, his hands beginning to shake. "We rode together on cattle drives years back. He was poisoned then. Last I heard, he was sitting in a Wyoming jail for rustling. Well, he ain't in jail now. He's at the saloon." "What is it?" Clara asked, seeing the pure fear in his eyes. What's wrong? Jack Carver ain't here for work, Caleb said, pacing the small room. Remember that bank robbery when you first got here? 3 men hit the bank, killed the clerk, and got away with $5,000. They never caught him. The floor felt like it dropped out from under her. You think it was him? I think he was one of them. And I think he knows I got a good look at him that day. The memory hit her hard. The gunshots, the chaos, and Caleb pulling her to safety. He'd been right in the thick of it. If Jack even thinks I can point a finger at him, Caleb's voice was grim, he won't think twice about putting me in the ground. Then we tell the sheriff. And say what? That I got a bad feeling about a man from my past? That ain't enough to get him arrested, Clara. But it's more than enough to get me killed. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped Clara's throat. So what do we do? We watch our backs, you don't go anywhere alone, and we pray he moves on. But the look on Caleb's face said he didn't believe in that kind of prayer. That night, Caleb wanted her to stay somewhere else, somewhere safer. Clara flat out refused. I didn't fight this hard for this life just to run from the first sign of trouble, she said, her chin set. We face this together. Clara, this ain't some grumpy customer. Jack Carver is a killer. Then we don't give him a reason, she pleaded. I can't promise that, Caleb said, his eyes full of desperation. If it's a choice between keeping you safe and poking that snake, I'm choosing you. For 3 long days, a tense quiet settled over the town. The Carver brothers stayed at the saloon, drinking and waiting. Caleb stayed glued to Clara's side, his gun always within reach. On the 4th day, the quiet broke. As Clara was locking up for the night, the door creaked open. It was Jack Carver. He was alone. Her hand slid toward the pistol Caleb had hidden behind the counter. Evening, Miss Bennett, Carver said, his smile all teeth. Well now, I hope I am not bothering you, but we are closed up. Clara kept her voice even, her hand resting near her pistol. You will have to come back tomorrow. Carver smirked. I am not here for supplies. I am here about Caleb Rowan. He is not here. I know that. I saw him ride out. That is why I'm here now, to talk to you alone. Carver got closer, his eyes cold as a winter creek. See, Caleb was mighty quick to pull you out of danger during that bank robbery, almost like he knew it was coming. He saved my life, that is all. Or maybe he saw someone he recognized, someone who would be a problem if they could be identified. Do you understand what I am saying? Clara's heart was hammering, but she met his stare. I hear you threatening me. Not a threat, just explaining things. If something bad were to happen to you, Caleb would be motivated to keep his mouth shut. Maybe even leave town for good. Get out, Clara said, her hand gripping the pistol. Or what? You will shoot me? Carver chuckled. I do not think so. You are not the type, but Caleb is. He has got it in him. So what do you want? I want Caleb Rowan to forget what he saw. I want him to mind his own business, and I want you to make sure he does. Carver straightened up. You have got 3 days. After that, my brothers and I will handle it. It would be a real shame if this pretty little store burned down. With you inside. He left, the door slamming behind him. Clara sank to the floor, the gun feeling heavy in her hand. Caleb found her there minutes later. He took one look at her face and knelt beside her. Tell me, he said. She told him everything about Carver's threats and the 3-day deadline. When she finished, Caleb's face was cold and hard. He threatened you, Caleb said in a low voice. In your own store. Caleb, what are we going to do? He helped her to her feet. We are going to the sheriff right now. We will tell him everything I suspected about the robbery and Carver's threats. Then I'm making sure you are someplace safe. The sheriff's office is closed. Then we will go to his house. This cannot wait. Carver gave us 3 days, but I do not trust that man one bit. They locked the door and hurried through the dark streets to Sheriff Tom McKenna's house. McKenna, a lawman in Red Hollow for 20 years, listened to their story with a grim face. Jack Carver, he said. He is wanted in 3 territories. If he is here, we need to move fast. He looked at Caleb. Are you sure you can identify him from the robbery? I am about 90% certain I saw him. But that is not the point. The point is he is threatening Clara right now to keep me quiet. McKenna stood and grabbed his gun belt. I agree. I will gather my deputies and we will arrest Carver and his brothers tonight. Where can Clara stay safely? Sarah Pritchard's boarding house, McKenna said. I will post a deputy there. Miss Bennett, you need to pack a bag. You are not going back to that store until this is over. Clara wanted to object but saw the fear in Caleb's eyes and nodded. I will go, but Caleb is coming with me. I would not have it any other way, Caleb said. They slipped back to the store in the dark, Caleb watching every shadow. Clara packed quickly, grabbing a few clothes and her most precious belongings. As she closed her bag, gunshots exploded outside. Caleb threw Clara to the floor. Stay down! The front window shattered, spraying glass everywhere. Caleb shielded her with his own body, just like he did the first time they met. They are not waiting 3 days, Caleb growled. Carver must have seen us go to the sheriff. What will we do? We are going to survive, Caleb said, his face grim as he drew his pistol. Stay behind the counter. He took a position by the broken window as 3 men surrounded the store. Jack Carver's voice echoed from the darkness. Last chance, Rowan. Leave the girl and ride out of town. That is not happening, Caleb yelled back. Then you both die. Gunfire ripped through the walls, splintering wood and destroying Clara's inventory. Caleb fired back, his shot steady and aimed. But Clara knew it was 3 against 1. They were trapped. Suddenly, she heard more gunshots from a different direction, and men shouting. Sheriff McKenna's voice boomed. Drop your weapons, you are surrounded! The next few moments were pure chaos, but soon silence fell. It is over, Caleb said, moving to the door. McKenna got them. Clara stumbled to the window and saw Jack Carver and his brothers in shackles. The deputies had them under control. Are y'all all right in there? McKenna called out. We are fine, Caleb answered. The store took some damage, but we are not hurt. Clara looked at the shattered windows and bullet-riddled walls of her store. Everything she had worked for was in ruins. Tears welled up, but she would not let them fall. Caleb wrapped his arms around her. We will fix it, he whispered. I promise. Every last board. What if they come back? They will not. And even if they did, I would never let them touch you. He turned her to face him. Clara, I will always protect you, no matter the cost. It almost cost you everything tonight, she said, her voice breaking. You could have died because of me. Because I love you, Caleb said firmly. Because you are worth fighting for. He kissed her gently. I have lost people I loved before. I am not losing you. Clara held on to him, finally letting the fear wash away. They stood together in the middle of her wrecked dream. Marry me, Caleb said suddenly. Clara pulled back, her eyes wide. What? Marry me, he said again, his voice sure and steady. Caleb's voice found its strength. Now, I know this ain't the most romantic spot, proposing in a store full of bullet holes with the lawman outside. But I almost lost you tonight, Clara, because of my past. While guns were blazing, all I could think was that I needed a lifetime with you. He looked her square in the eye. I love your stubborn strength. I even love the terrible coffee you make. Marry me. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but her smile was as bright as the morning sun. Yes, oh yes, of course. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promises. As the deputies led away the men who'd tried to ruin them, Clara knew this was a love worth fighting for, a love that was more than enough. Sleep was a stranger to them that night. Caleb sat watch by the window, his gun never far from his hand. Every time I close my eyes, he finally said, his voice rough, I see you on that floor. I see you dying because of me. Clara sat up in the dark and reached for him. What if my past puts you in danger again and again? Don't you dare, Caleb Rowan, she said, cupping his face. Don't you use this to push me away. You asked me to marry you, and I said yes. Did you mean it? With every piece of my heart, he answered. Then the only way to protect me is by staying, she whispered, their foreheads touching. We face this together. His kiss was a soft surrender. You're right, he managed with a rusty laugh. Deal. In the daylight, the damage to the store was a gut punch. Windows were shattered, walls were riddled with holes, and years of hard work lay in ruins. Despair crept in as Clara saw it all. How can we possibly fix this? Caleb wrapped a strong arm around her. We'll manage. I have some money saved for new windows, and my labor is free. An hour later, Sarah Pritchard arrived with breakfast and good news. The women of Red Hollow were organizing a work party. Soon the whole town came together. Men brought lumber and tools, women brought cleaning supplies and food. They showed Clara in no uncertain terms that she was one of them now. And in Red Hollow, folks take care of their own. Have you ever seen good people get knocked down so hard you wonder if they will ever get back up? That was Clara after her store was shot to pieces. But then Caleb, the quiet man who saved her, came out of his self-imposed exile to help. This story is about how a community and two broken souls can rebuild something stronger than what was lost. Folks showed up right away, replacing windows and shoring up the door. Caleb worked from sunup to sundown, his hands raw, but his spirit healing. He was slowly coming back to the life he had left 7 years ago. The sheriff stopped by one afternoon with news. He said Jack Carver and his brothers confessed to everything and were headed for trial in Helena. They would likely hang. He told Caleb his testimony sealed the deal. When Clara asked if they had to worry about the rest of their gang, the sheriff shook his head. He said those boys worked alone and were not well liked. Still, he offered to post a deputy nearby. But Caleb just wrapped an arm around Clara and said it would not be necessary. He was home now, and he was not going anywhere. By Christmas week, the store was not just fixed, it was better than ever. The new windows let in a warm, welcoming light, and the shelves Caleb built were sturdy and fine. Standing in the doorway on Christmas Eve, Clara whispered that it was beautiful, even better than before. Caleb stood behind her and said, "Just like us, broken but stronger where we mended." They were married on New Year's Day, with half the town of Red Hollow there to see it. Clara wore a simple ivory dress, a gift from a friend. When Caleb slipped that plain gold band on her finger, she felt the weight of all they had survived. It had all led them to this moment, to this man, and to the life they were choosing to build together. As they sealed their marriage with a kiss, Caleb whispered, "I love you, my brave, stubborn wife." And Clara whispered back, "I love you too, my broken, beautiful husband." The party afterward was a loud, joyful mess of fiddle music, dancing, and more food than a small army could eat. It was perfect. As they danced, Clara laid her head on Caleb's shoulder and asked, "Did you ever think that day you pulled me out of the gunfire, that we would end up here?" Caleb held her a little tighter. "No. I figured I would save you, then disappear right back to my ranch. I thought I was done with happiness, done with people, done with everything but just getting by." He smiled down at her. "Then you came along and just would not let me disappear. You kept showing up, refusing to give up on me until I had no choice but to let you into my life." Clara grinned. "Sorry about that." He shook his head. "Do not be. You being too stubborn to take no for an answer was the best thing that ever happened to me." That night, back in the small apartment above the store where their story truly began, Caleb knew he had to tell her something important. As they lay together in the quiet darkness, he took a breath. "I need to tell you about Mary," he said softly. He told Clara that he would always love his first wife, that losing her and their daughter nearly broke him for good. "But what I feel for you," he insisted, his hand tightening on her shoulder, "is not less than what I had with Mary. It is just different. We came to each other already knowing how bad life can hurt. We chose this, knowing the risk." Clara understood completely. "And that makes it stronger," she said, "because we are choosing love, even though we know the cost." Exactly, Caleb said. You are not a replacement, Clara. You are a brand new beginning. The very next morning, they rode out to his ranch. He wanted to properly introduce her to Mary and their little girl, Rebecca, at their graves on the hill. Standing there, Caleb mentioned selling the ranch to be closer to her in town. Clara took his hand immediately. Do not. This place is where you built your first life. It is part of your story, which means it is part of our story now. We will figure it out together. Caleb looked at her, his eyes full of a love so deep it was breathtaking. How did I ever get so lucky? He asked. You saved my life, she replied. And then you just kept on saving it. We saved each other, Caleb. I reckon that is the real story here. They found a rhythm, spending 3 days at the ranch and 4 in town. But their new life faced its first true test in April. Clara realized she was pregnant. Instead of joy, a cold terror seized her. What if she died in childbirth like Mary? What if they had to dig another small grave on that hill? Caleb found her in tears and knew right away. She whispered, I am pregnant, and I am so scared. He held her tight as she shook. I know, he said, but we will face it together. We will find the best doctor in all of Montana. Yes, things can go wrong, but we are going to do everything we can to make sure they go right. I am with you, Clara. We are in this together. And in his arms, she finally started to believe that this new beginning was stronger than the sorrows of the past. Model, are you scared? Clara asked him. Terrified, he admitted, his voice low. Terrified of losing you, or another child. But I'm hopeful too. Hopeful to be a father again. Clara nodded, understanding him completely. We can be both, can't we? Scared and hopeful at the same time. That's what they chose to be. Red Hollow rallied around them, choosing support over fear. Sarah Pritchard appointed herself Clara's guardian, bringing tonics and advice. Even gruff Tom Brewster gifted them a hand-carved cradle. As Clara grew, so did Caleb's protectiveness. I'm pregnant, not breakable, she would tease. I know, he'd say, his voice thick with emotion. I just can't lose you. I've lost too much already. If that's what it takes, I reckon I'll be the most protective husband in all of Montana. Clara just smiled at that. She shuffled over to him, her belly leading the way. You have to trust that I am strong enough for this. Just trust that we are going to be all right. I am trying, he said. Well, try harder, she teased, softening it with a kiss. The baby decided to come on a chilly November morning. The pain started before the sun was up, and Clara found herself gripping Sarah Pritchard's hand, trying her best not to scream. Caleb paced the floor outside like a penned-up bull, his face pale with worry. Alice Murphy finally put a hand on his shoulder. She will be fine, Caleb. Women go through this all the time. Mary was strong too, Caleb said, his voice hollow. And she died. Mary had cholera, she reminded him gently. Clara has a doctor and good women to help her, and she has you. It is different this time. But it was hard to trust when he heard Clara's cries, and the hours just kept dragging on. Finally, he could not stand it anymore and pushed his way into the bedroom. I am here, he said, taking her hand. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Caleb, promise me you will take care of the baby if something goes wrong. Nothing is going wrong, he insisted. Promise me, I promise. But you are going to hold our baby, and we are going to raise this child together. You are going to live to be 90 years old, surrounded by grandkids. His voice cracked. You are not leaving me, Clara. I flat out will not allow it. Just then another pain hit, and a scream tore from her throat. The doctor moved fast, and then a brand new sound filled the room. A baby's cry, tiny, but full of life. It is a boy, the doctor announced. A healthy boy. Caleb's eyes were locked on his wife. Clara, talk to me. I am okay, she whispered, exhausted. Just tired. Can I see him? They placed the little bundle in her arms, and a look of pure wonder washed over her face. He was perfect. He had Clara's dark hair, but when he opened his eyes, they were Caleb's blue. "He is beautiful," Clara whispered. "We made something beautiful, Caleb." Caleb sat on the bed, wrapping an arm around her and tracing a finger over the baby's tiny hand. "Yeah, we sure did. What should we name him?" Caleb thought for a moment. "George. After your uncle, the man who brought you to Red Hollow and gave us a shot at finding each other." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "George Rowan. I love it." And so they became a family, just the three of them, built from heartache and a stubborn refusal to give up on love. In the weeks that followed, Caleb found being a father again was both easier and harder. It was easier because he remembered the basics, but harder because every little moment reminded him of Rebecca, his daughter he had lost. But Clara was his rock, just like he had been hers. They made sure to keep Rebecca's memory alive, telling little George all about the big sister he would never get to meet. One night, while he was rocking George, he asked Clara, "Do you think she would be happy she has a brother?" "I think she would love him," Clara said softly. "And she would be so proud of you for being brave enough to love again, even knowing how much it can hurt." The years that followed were full and busy, just as they should be. The store did better than ever, and Caleb hired a young fella named Jack Morrison to help out at the ranch. They had two more children, a daughter named Mary Rebecca, who they called Molly, and another son, Thomas. Their little home above the store got too crowded, so they built a house between town and the ranch. George grew up strong and stubborn like his mother, with a love for horses just like his sister Rebecca. Molly was a chatterbox, and Thomas was the little peacemaker who loved the store. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb and Clara rode up to the cemetery on the hill. They brought wildflowers and stood holding hands, looking at the graves of Mary and Rebecca. "I still talk to them, you know," Caleb admitted. "I tell them about the kids and how you nearly burned dinner last week." "It was not burned, it was just a little charred," she laughed, leaning against him. "Do you think they mind? That you are happy with someone else?" "No. I think they are glad I found you," he said, pulling her close. "Mary would have liked you. She would have appreciated how you never let me get stuck in my own misery. And Rebecca would have loved having a house full of noise and chaos. I hope they know we have not forgotten them." "They know," Caleb said, kissing her head. "And they are proud of us. I am sure of it." Over the years, Caleb and Clara became a cornerstone of Red Hollow, the couple who had built a beautiful life out of broken pieces. Their story became a local legend, told to newcomers with a little more flair each time. But Caleb and Clara knew the real story was not about grand gestures. It was about showing up, day in and day out. It was about writing letters when words were too hard, fixing roofs, and holding each other through the bad times. It was about choosing, again and again, to keep trying. One warm summer evening, 23 years after she first came to Red Hollow, Clara stood on their porch watching the sunset. Caleb came up behind her, his hair now gray but his blue eyes as clear as ever. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that first day," she said, leaning back against him. "When you saved me from those bank robbers, did you have any idea what you were starting?" "Not a clue. I just saw somebody who needed help." He paused. "Well, that is not the whole truth. I saw you standing there, and for the first time in 7 long years, I felt something other than heartache. I felt like maybe there was a reason to keep on living after all. After that robbery," he confessed, "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you running this store all alone, so I figured I could help with letters, offer advice without getting tangled up, do something good without risking my heart." Clara smiled against his chest. "That plan didn't work out so well." "No," he chuckled, holding her tighter. "It worked out a whole lot better." Inside the house, they could hear their grown children laughing, the sound of a life they built together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Letting me in?" "Never," he said, turning to face her. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my life, Clara. We saved each other, she whispered. Best decision I ever made, he said, was stopping the letters and showing up myself. It had been a long, hard road from that terrible October to this quiet night, but they had walked it together. As they got to the door, Caleb gently stopped Clara for one last kiss. He whispered, "Thank you for being too stubborn to let me just disappear. Thank you for those letters." Clara smiled back at him. "And thank you for riding into town every single day, even when you were scared to." "Always," Caleb promised her. "I will always ride into town for you." And he kept that promise for the rest of his days. They did not need secret letters anymore. They had a life built in the sunlight, full of shared work and laughter. Years later, long after Caleb and Clara were gone, their children found a wooden box in the attic. Inside was every letter they had ever sent. The words told a story of two broken people learning how to trust and how to love again. Reading those letters, their children finally understood the whole story. They saw that love was not about big gestures, but about the small, daily choice to just show up. George, with silver hair of his own now, read the first letter out loud. "The leak in your roof is in the back corner. You need to patch it before the next big rain." "So practical, just like Papa," Molly said with a tearful smile. "He could have just stayed hidden on his ranch," Thomas added, "but he chose to help. Down in Red Hollow, where the store still stands, people still tell the story. They talk about the quiet cowboy and the determined woman from back east. The details might get a little bigger with each telling, but the heart of it stays true. Two hurting people found each other in a town that was barely there. They found healing right in the middle of their own broken pieces. And together they built something that would last. Something that proved it is never too late to start living again. It is never too late to choose love after you have known loss. It all happened because a cowboy decided to write a letter instead of just riding away. And it happened because a woman chose to push back instead of giving up. They were two folks who were scared and scarred, certain they were too broken to ever be fixed. But they decided to try anyway. That was the real story. It was not about the dramatic moments. It was about the simple, daily choice to be there for each other. The letters, which started in darkness, ended up leading them both into the light. And in the end, that one choice to just try changed everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.